Horror is one of the few genres of fiction that can be used to make truly powerful criticisms of culture, history, and much more. It's not a new feature to the genre, though for some reason people act like Jordan Peele is some sort of new age thinker for adding commentary into his horror films. No disrespect to him and his movies are pretty good generally, but this has been a part of the genre since its earliest days. The original novel of Frankenstein was commenting on the scientific ambitions of many minds of the time. George Romero's Dawn of the Dead has a heavy criticism of the rising culture of, well, consumerism at the time, and there's so many other horror stories like this that it'd be impossible to list them all in just one video. Yet, how would horror with the main demographic of children try to portray these issues? How does one present harder and darker ideas to kids without going completely on the deep end? You could probably take the route of something like Goosebumps, where you write a collection of fun, short horror stories, but try not to go into anything too deep, instead relying on surface level ideas and scares. No disrespect to Goosebumps, but let's be honest, I don't think they're gonna make an episode talking about the created social divides in our culture. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I love Goosebumps personally. But maybe there is a way to make children's horror stories that have some major weight to them. To me, the prime example of this is Paranorman, a story about a young boy who was just born different from everyone else. And while many in his environment may hate him for that, his differences may be the thing that just gives him the strength to do what no one else could. So sit back, relax, and let's dig into Paranorman and the fear of being different. As typical of my channel by now, I like to talk about the people who worked on something, as well as its production history, before starting any sort of review. Paranorman was produced by what is now probably iconic animation studio Laika, though Laika's history is a winding and interesting one. The studio was originally called Will Vinton Studios, of which they mostly did shorts and commercials. In fact, their studio's original owner created many iconic advertisements in the 80s and 90s, such as the Noid for Domino's, the California Raisins, and also the CGI ads for the M&Ms. Of course, with any artist, they wanted to break out and do more. Plus, who wants to be stuck doing commercials for eternity? The problem? Well, they didn't exactly have the money to make major motion pictures. However, someone who worked there was Travis Knight, the son of Phil Knight, aka the owner of Nike, the shoe company. Thus, they got their major benefactor and a new owner with Phil Knight and Travis Knight, and from there they really pushed to get many full-length movies made. In 2005, they renamed themselves to Laika, which is actually the name of the first dog in space, of which that dog was launched into space by Russia in 1957, eventually getting iconic stop-motion animation director Henry Selick, director of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and entering the animated feature scene with a bang with the 2009 classic Coraline. Man, 2009 was a crazy good year for animated films. Coraline, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Summer Wars, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Killer Bean Forever, Princess and the Frog, Redline. Seriously, what was going on with animation that year? These are all pretty iconic and great movies. Yes, even Killer Bean. The directors on this particular movie were Sam Fell and Chris Butler. Sam Fell has directed quite a few animated movies such as Flushed Away, The Tale of Despero, and Chicken Run, Dawn of the Nugget. Chris Butler has mostly worked on Laika projects, at least that's what IMDb says. He's mostly worked as a writer. He's written for Paranorman, Missing Link, and Kubo and the Two Strings. As for the actors within the movie, we've got some heavy-hitting stars in here, and some people who haven't been seen much since the movie. Norman was played by Cody Smith-McAfee. I think that's how you pronounce it. He's been acting since a child. He's been in many other big projects, like playing the boy in the movie The Road, but also playing in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and even playing as Nightcrawler in X-Men Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix. The biggest name probably on the project is Anna Kendrick, who plays Norman's sister Courtney. I mean, it feels like Anna Kendrick was one of the biggest women comedy actors in the 2010s. She's mostly known for her starring role in the Pitch Perfect series, but she's also played in the Twilight Saga, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and is also the voice of Poppy in the Troll films. The other biggest star in this movie is Christopher Mintz-Plasse. I think that's how you pronounce it. His biggest role, and probably most iconic, is starring as McLovin in the classic film Superbad. But he's also been in a ton of other projects. He plays in all three How to Train Your Dragon movies, Kick-Ass 1 and 2, and is also the voice of Sun in Blark and Son. I just like that show, that's why I wanted to mention it. Casey Affleck plays Mitch, the jock character, and he's had a big career too, mostly sticking to auteur or independent films. He's been in many big films like the Ocean's films, Interstellar, Good Will Hunting, and many, many more. As for our final star to mention, Tucker Albreze plays Neil, and his career is primarily in television, mostly making appearances in a lot of Disney Channel productions and various other sitcoms, though occasionally making some appearances in TV or direct-to-DVD movies. And even on Tim and Eric Awesome Show Great Job, though where I don't really know. The animators in the movie use many classic techniques in stop motion, such as armatures, sculpture, and so much more. In fact, you could find this all on YouTube since they posted small videos on how they made the movie online. The interesting thing about a lot of the puppets within the movie is that a lot of them actually break a lot of stop motion norms. Characters with large chests, necks, or proportions tend to be much harder to animate. which is also a struggle since Leica tends to try and add little details of realism into all their animations. A fun little challenge was Neil, since he's on the more portly side, so they took a guitar piece and reformatted it to be what the staff calls Neil's belly mover, which is what achieves his stomach's natural motion on camera. Though, that's all there is to be said about the production history of the movie for now. I think it's time for us to get into the movie itself. Usually, I start a review of something by speaking about the plot and characters. Instead, I'm going to switch it up and talk about the incredible animation. Leica is one of the studios who are known for pushing the boundary on what can be done with stop motion, and from a technical perspective, this might be one of the most impressive uses of the medium of all time. I said earlier Leica tends to lend a bit of realism to their characters' animation, and you could see it throughout the movie. Neil's stomach moves realistically, but also the zombies have insanely good secondary animation to make them feel really, well, real. There's one zombie whose jaw flesh is hanging off their skull for the entire movie, and instead of it just being still the entire time, they actually had to accurately stop motion animate every shot so that it's flopping around realistically. Seriously, think about that. That's a lot of effort to do for just one character, and those are the little things that make the movie great. The car chase scene is one that's incredibly animated. Usually you don't see heavy action moments in stop motion, but they somehow made this entire action segment in stop motion and made each moment impactful. That's just insane when you really think about it. Even animating the ghost must have been a challenge, animating clay models in ways that feel smoother than all the other characters. Hell, they had one guy animating the toilet paper zombies in the bathroom. And yes, those are made of what seems to be actual paper. It does all this and yet still keeps the charm and direction of something that feels like a nice indie movie, including a lot of guitar-driven tracks and the more relaxed scenes of the movie. It's an amazing showcase of pushing a medium to its technical brink and yet doing it seemingly so casually. Now I think it's time we shift gears and talk about the characters and the plot. Our main character, obviously, is Norman, a kid who's different because he was born with the ability to see and speak with ghosts. We see throughout the movie that he's isolated and treated like a nuisance just for being born unlike everyone else. This, of course, makes him just stick to himself and act standoffish, partially taking part in that isolation. It's a part of the phenomenon that if you hear everyone tell you something about yourself, even if it's not true, you might start to believe it to some extent. He only finds any form of solace interacting with the dead. With his interactions with the dead, we see that Norman is a pretty likable guy when he's just himself. He seems to be a naturally caring and gentle person. The only person who gives Norman actual respect is Neil, and it doesn't come from any sort of pity or self-righteousness. He's an outsider just like him, though Neil gets made fun of just for being, well, fat. Which honestly, he's not even that big. He's chunky, but I've seen kids who are far bigger when I was younger. But some kids will find any reason to make fun of or keep away from others. Everyone else in town, though, treats Norman pretty poorly. His sister Courtney is a sort of cheerleader Starbucks girl type, you know, always on the phone, speaking loud enough to make the whole universe hear their conversation, and is just generally snarky to everyone. Norman's father even treats his kid awfully. He's probably the worst to his own son. The only other person who's kind to Norman is his mother, but it's clear she doesn't completely understand her son, though she does give genuinely good advice at one part of the movie. To be honest, I feel like this is a surprisingly accurate depiction of what children with disabilities are treated like in many parts of the country, either being made fun of for differences they can't help, or just actively ignored by everyone else because people just don't want to deal with them. Of course, that may be just me inserting my own personal experiences into my interpretation of the movie. All this ties heavily into the overall plot of the film. Throughout the movie, we dig into the history of the setting and learn about how the horrible past led to the horrific circumstances of the movie. And rather intelligently, it ties it all the way back to the witch trials of early America, which is one of the most horrific events in American history, amongst many, many, many others. But this ties into the story of Aggie, the witch, who really was just a little girl with the same ability as Norman. Of course, while she was very likely hated and isolated by the town, she was also sentenced to death for supposed witchcraft. The movie boils this down all to fear, the one place where discrimination of people with different gifts, disabilities, etc. starts. Thus, this led to a generational line of trauma and isolation for anyone who was different. Within the movie, we see that the town does a yearly play and even celebrates the fact that they killed the witch, which plays into the whole idea that this town, as well as many small towns in the US, celebrate conformity over individuality. And thus, anything that challenges that is treated as a threat. The symbolism that Aggie in her anger destroyed the statue of the witch they have in their town square is not lost on me. Throughout history, there's many examples of exaggerated caricatures made of people who are not, quote-unquote, normal, either to create comedy and thus downplaying an entire group's struggles, or to create fear. I mean, we still do this to this day, but I'm not gonna get too far into that because I know for a fact some people are too bitch-made to accept the reality of our current situation. Anyways, we see this painful existence flipped onto the people who killed Aggie, now making them experience what they treated her like on a more extreme scale, cursing them with the ultimate irony, forcing them to empathize with her. Thus, this is why Norman is the perfect person to end her and thus the whole town's suffering. He sees past the fear, past the stereotypes, and everything else people enforce, instead just seeing a human being, just like everyone else. He uses our strongest ability as humans, empathy, and just talks to her. He tries to understand her because while he can't relate 100%, he could find the similarities between them, while also being able to address their differences. And for the first time in probably centuries, he gave something to Aggie she didn't have in such a long time. He didn't just temporarily placate her, but instead gave her genuine kindness. And with that, she was finally able to rest. Going back to what I said at the start of the video, horror is a genre that we can use to dig into larger societal issues. Paranorman is an example of this, and it's a pretty powerful one too, examining how being othered in our world is a truly horrifying experience, not being able to speak with anyone because of the general world's biases. Explicit or not, anyone of a group that isn't preferred in any one region of the world has to accept that they will encounter all forms of issues, be it active social isolation, false kindness built of virtue signaling, and so many other problems. Paranorman, somehow, accomplishes this and shows us all these things while keeping it PG. It juggles all these more mature elements while also being a fun movie for the whole family. It's not the only movie to do this, but I think this is rarely seen within children's horror. I think we need to celebrate more often when children's horror accomplishes things like this because it creates a safe environment for our children to learn about the world they'll be entering. To get personal here, this movie really helped me a lot as a kid. I was definitely a different kid. I was really one of the only kids with an obvious physical disability who wasn't forced directly into ESE classes. And I didn't have many friends. I wasn't really actively made fun of by any people, at least not directly to my face, but most kids just didn't want to interact with me because, I don't know really. I don't think I was unpleasant or anything, but most of my childhood was either kids just ignoring me because I was quote-unquote a weird kid. I didn't really get a larger friend group until high school. I don't know if there was some sort of cultural shift or something, or maybe I just suddenly became approachable to everyone. I don't know. But as a young kid, this was one of my favorite movies to watch around Halloween. It felt nice to know that I wasn't alone in being, different. There were many kids who were just like me. Kids who really weren't rude or mean, just treated differently because of what they were. And really, that's a powerful thing that fiction can do. It doesn't need to do it all the time, but it could be powerful to just make people feel less alone. And not the corny, oh my god, this is so relatable type of art, but actual emotional art that can make people feel connected. And really, that's truly special. So, yeah, that's all I really have to talk about, at least when it comes to Paranorman. Sorry if maybe this video was a downer or just a bit too heavy, but I have a strong personal attachment to this movie, and I always have. But with all that being said, what did you think of the video? I hope you liked it, commented, subscribed. I don't really know, I'm not going to control what you do, but seriously, I do hope you enjoyed the video, because that's the most important thing about this, and not the metrics and all that. But with all that being said, I'll see you next time.